Next session, ensuring learning relevance in hybrid world, that is strategies and best practices. For that, I would like to call Mr. Shashwat Mitra, Global Head of Human Resource, KPIT. Mr. Shashwat is the Global Head of Human Resource at KPIT, leading HR operations, HR strategies, and M&A integration, compliance, culture, sustainability, CSR, key organizational projects, and the key requirements of Board of Directors. He leads it for 14,000 plus spread across 25 countries. Shashwat is responsible for aligning the HR strategies and the business vision, fostering a high-performance culture and developing the talent pipeline for the future. He comes with close 2 decades of experience, have built and led regional terms, coached leaders for transformative journeys, partnered with stakeholders, and implemented transformational contemporary HR practices for strategic importance of business globally. I would like to call Mr. Shashwat Mitra on board, please.
Thank you.
Can we have a huge round of applause?
Afternoon, everyone. So how far do I stand from the lunch break? All right, the laughter said it quite well. So thank you so much for this time. I have around 15 minutes and I wish to do full justice to that. I'll try to keep it more conversational and try and engage the larger crowd out here in the room as well. As a format, I will request if we could take the questions towards the end, and if you're still left with some more questions, I intended it that way. Once again, thank you for being here. I am really happy to be in company of my colleagues, friends there, and a lot of industry professionals and people whom I got a chance to meet with. That's not my slide. Happens. Did we all had our coffee and tea? Yes. Brilliant. It's a filler question, trust me. I am sure you all had it. Did you all had a nice break? Is filler question 2. Perfect. No, this is real, okay? That's my slide. So I want to begin with this. Before we move across, are you all able to see, do you see, it's not hazy, it's an intended slide there. So before we move across and talk about learning, strategies, best practices, AI, metaverse, and all of those things, let's take a moment to ground ourselves. Let's a moment to put our feet right on the ground and be thankful and be humble to who we are and why and what we have in our hands to be able to accomplish. So if you see that small little pink blue dot there, can you see that? Right? How many of you have seen this picture or image in the past? Some of you. So in case you're wondering, that's the blue dot I'm referring to. And that's the blue dot where each one of us, the summation of our emotions, all what we have known as legacy, all what we are going to leave back, all what we have accomplished, all what we will lose, it's all in that blue dot. So that's the image of Earth taken in 1990 from a distance of 6 billion kilometers. It's too big a number. Let me simplify it for us. So that's an image taken if you have to do a Pune-Bombay just 400 lakh times. That's the distance you actually go to. And from there, this image has been taken in 1990. And do you know, this to me is the most costliest image. Can anyone make a guess how much this image has costed us or is still costing us? Make a guess. Today's valuation. And we can participate. They assured me that there is an extra dessert for people who say so. Sorry? $1 billion? How many? $1 billion is a takeaway thing, but how many? $3 billion. Okay, so she says $3 billion. Anyone else would like to make a little more ambitious, or like $1 billion is a lot of money to have? 5? 500 crore rupees is kind of less than 3 billion. So, but 500 crores will take. Okay. This image, as of today's valuation of dollar terms, has costed $800 billion to NASA. That's the amount. Now, the reason why I wanted to bring across all of these big numbers out here is to just help us all understand and realize we are just a tiny speck of a blue dot, and we are talking about all things what we could accomplish. And that's where I want to set the tone for my rest of my presentation. That's the topic which I will talk and touch upon, but I want to get a highlight of the key words which you will see me talk more. I'll focus on relevance, I'll focus on hybrid, and well, there is nothing called a strategy because the strategy is highly subjective to the ecosystem in which you're trying to apply it across. There can't be a broad spectrum strategy. I mean, if there is one, let's all refer to Philip Kotler's book on those fundamentals, but otherwise not. Best practices, again, what worked for our purposes may not work for anyone else. The context becomes really important. So with that as a precursor, so where does learning typically happen? Anyone wants to make a guess? Where does learning happen? Everywhere, absolutely. Everywhere, right? Like maybe this, I mean, I will like to, for my own self-gratification, I will say that I am hoping to teach and share some piece of learning to you all. You can defer to that towards the end, silently. But learning happens everywhere, right? So learning happens here. I mean, a person sitting right by itself, and I would have wished the person would have seen outside towards the window, a nice perspective to have, but the learning is happening there. Learning is happening here where a person, where a group of people, women, who are trying to weave something in form of a garment, and the difference is the logo is Louis Vuitton, which would get across and be sold on some of the nice stores in Venice and other places. So learning is happening there. Learning is even happening equally on the manufacturing sites where what we believe in, we will have an instructor-led training program or a virtual or a mobile thing. All of that fall flat when you're talking about manufacturing setup. And many of you, I believe, would come in from this side of the business. Trust me, when you have to really negotiate and work with the trade unions and try and get settlement in place and have the productivity goals added to that, this plays a big role, and that's a perspective. So learning is happening here as well. And yes, maybe in form of a group setting in our offices, or could be a co-working space. And how many of you have permanent work from home? Oh gosh. No, oh gosh was a natural emotion which came, I couldn't filter it. So learning is happening here as well. And for others who are working from home, I think that's the image I would like you all to refer to, but watch outside towards the window. And learning is happening here. How many of us come from an FMCG background? Okay, brilliant, all right. So, I mean, to your point of sale, the learning really needs to happen. I mean, if I go across and talk to a person, are we all good with Hindi for a moment? All right, great. So, bhaiya mujhe Mirinda dena ya Fanta dena? I mean, to someone novice, it's like an orange carbonated drink. But to me, Mirinda is an emotion, Fanta, I don't understand. The same goes in case of Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Thumbs Up. Each one has its own fan base and what goes with that too, right? So, the learning is happening here as well. So, learning to me is highly contextual in nature. And that's where I think we all make a mistake, that we miss the context and try and see this worked in organization A, and I would just like to use it and place it across another place. Keep that in the context. So we cannot take people out of their regular flow and expect that people will learn. You have to have your learning intervention in the flow, the state of flow. You need to have people learn in the state of flow and rope it into their daily activities. Now let's move forward. So here's a question for all of you, okay? How many of you associate yourself towards this side of the image? Hands up, please. Some of you. I mean, I don't understand this hands up. I mean, I know this. All right, perfect, thank you. How many of you associate yourself to the other side? Fantastic. Brilliant. How many of you did not raise your hand at all? That's also fine, because that's also our target audience, right? Now, I think the important part here is that learning is highly contextual in nature. I mean, what would work typically for someone on the other side, reading through the limited 140 characters of news. I mean, for me, news is Hindu editorial, right? News to me is Economic Times going through, I mean, these days Economic Times has IPO pages running to first 4 or 5 pages of that. Let's read that across. Economic Times is where my news feeds come in from. Or in terms of an audio news, I think BBC, it's good English. So it's highly contextual in nature, so we should not be mixing that across. Now, are two people learning the same way? I mean, I think we kind of established this across that no, our context is very different. So learning is highly personal. I did not intentionally use the word hyper-personalization because we talk, it's easy to talk, but when any one of you try and do any form of hyper-personalization, it's a huge cost. How many of you really understand the business side of a proposition like that? And trust me, hyper-personalization is not using email sorter where you send an email with a person's name on the top. That's not hyper-personalization, please. All right, we'll reserve that across. And do you understand or do you believe that everyone is at the same level of learning? Absolutely not. One thing which I would like to bring across that this group has a mix of people who have been digital natives or people who have been internet natives. How many of you have heard about Motorola pagers? Brilliant, right? I mean, many would just not understand what a pager is. I mean, why do you really need to send in some text into a cigarette-shaped box which beeps and just tells you, call this number, right? People don't understand, but that was a cool thing to have. Two, someone here, now one thing which is very important, each one of us can say that I did not come from that side, but today, you and I are AI natives. Each one of you, irrespective of our age, our kids, our elders, everyone is exposed to AI at the same time, and it's democratized. So there's no saying that I could not get an access to it. You can very well get an access to that on your phone as well. So that's what it goes, that it is highly, I mean, this level of learning is very different and the learning manifests very differently. Why? In the same class of people who are trying to be in a cohort, people learn differently, people respond differently, people refuse to change no matter your best efforts put forward, and that kind of goes back. So learning as a function, I think it's an overlay of multiple things. And trust me, learning is not a parking spot for anyone who just wants to be there. Unfortunately, many of the places, and I've seen it up and close, learning and development practice becomes a parking spot. That's not the case. It's in-depth decision science, which needs an involvement. You have human psychology, ecosystem understanding, and of course, technology. Speaking of ecosystem understanding, there was an organization in the past where we actually had 3 experts come and work on a learning intervention. And these 3 people were, one was an ophthalmologist, the second one was a color and texture expert, the third was a UI expert. All right, I'm talking about one of my previous organization, ophthalmologist, because those days we said the brand color of that company was red. I'm referring to Mahindra out here. And the red is it pinches your eye. So how can you have a brand compliance yet make a UI, a learning system where it doesn't pinch your eye? So we actually had a ophthalmologist, senior ophthalmologist, studied in the US, was operating or working out of Chennai, work with us. We had a color and texture expert who said that, well, if you just put a red color on the top, it's heavy. But if you put a red color and put some textures on it, it's easier to your eyes. It can go to that level of depth. Unfortunately, we are limited with our own limitations, so challenge ourselves. So coming to, and everyone would like to have something to take away from that. So that's an image I always go to. Technically, all what you can imagine, believe, think, and even fathom, all form of learning is right there. And it touches what we call as 70-20-10 kind of the model. So your environment, what's exposure, experience, and education. And you have all forms of training right around it, okay? However, the interesting part, it's not in the what's available for the offering, it's about what you make out of it. Now, instructor-led training program or an in-house program, what is the strategy you want to drive? Clearly defined. So for example, we at KPIT, so when we have to drive, by the way, I mean, the person who leads our Our learning function is on the functional side, we have someone who is a IIT, BHU, gold medalist, works on it. And on the behavioral side, we have someone who is a Carnegie Mellon engineer, studied MBA from Oxford, leads that. Unfortunately, learning has become a space where it's become more of a journalist side. It's not. It's absolutely not the case. I would like to go back and make a reference to one of my past papers, which was published in Harvard. At that time, when I looked at my co-presenters who were there, I had more people with PhDs in decision sciences working on designing the learning intervention. So it's as specialized as it could get. And we're talking about hybrid. Hybrid is the format. I think it's too transactional a topic to talk about. What you need to know is where your customers are, in this case, your employees, and how do you want to do it. So the whole amalgamation of policies, practices, employee value proposition, what you want to achieve, you have to get all of these things together. So to talk about more, can your return to workplace policy be aligned with your learning roadmap? Answer to that is absolutely yes. If you would like to get people back to office, you need to have something on the table for people to opt in for, and it better be good, because people have a choice to do almost anything, and you need to offer them that choice, and let them not feel that they are forced into it, they opted into that. So with that, I'll move into the last part on what are the strategies to be successful. And simple, I would just keep it across in 4 words. First word is where I started with. The first strategy, and you can't teach it, you can't drive that, is the humility to know that I don't know. Is the humility to accept that there's a lot I could understand. Is the humility to be open yourself to be learned by someone who is half your age. Is the humility to come across and say, I still don't understand this topic, but I'll need some help. The humility to go back to our homes and teach our parents how to use AI, or be learned or be taught by the youngsters, or what we call as reverse mentoring. It starts with the first keyword, which is humility. The second part is, it does not matter how humble you are, but if you do not have the DNA of what's called as learning agility, you will just not be able to move across. How many of you, okay, interesting. I'll borrow 2 extra minutes for the slide thing, okay? Oh, it's time's up. That's red, pinches eye, okay. All right, so on learnability, how many of you learned to swim? Swim. Okay. How many of you still know how to swim? Hey, people who learned how to swim had lesser hands. People who could still swim had more. Interesting, okay? So this is innate. So I'll give an example. There are few things which is hardwired into you. Like, for example, if you just take a dog, throw them into the pool, they just know how to swim through, okay? Or for that matter, anything. So they are hardwired. Are you really someone who is keen to do that? Third, how reflective are you on yourself, and how critically do you reflect on yourself defines how much, what I call as velocity, how soon you would like to learn, and what depth you would like to learn across. And last, no learning is of use. I mean, all those who learned swimming and are still swimming, great, kudos to you all. If you learn an art or a trade or a skill or competence, and if you don't use it across, it technically comes to no use. And again, 70-20-10 model, the 70 larger portion is the application side of it. So I think that's the simple basic things. And I am someone who always like to go back to the fundamentals, and I'm not looking at Dilkhush. I mean, she will say, I mean, this is a boss we have to deal with, but I pity both of us. With that, yeah, I know. That's the last slide, I promise, okay? So in terms of the best practice, simple 4 words, that's all. First, you cannot say this is a mandatory program, you have to go and do that. Then I know how the mandatory program operates. I have also done that myself, okay? You have to first create a very simple need. There is a need why you have asked someone to do something. If they don't see a need, allow them to drop out. If it's a mandate, allow them to opt out of the organization as well, but you just can't force people into it, okay? How many of you have kids and have been able to force your kids the last morsel after they said no? right? So that's how it operates. Second, once something is achieved, incentivize the fulfillment of that competence. So I think that's very important. When you say incentivizing, it can be intrinsic, it could be extrinsic, and you could link it with promotions, you could link it with competence level, give them Amazon vouchers, but again, you can create a need, again, the push and pull, the way you could talk about it. Third, keep it on the context. I mean, if someone teaches me how to learn Bharatanatyam, I mean, I would love to learn music, listening to it, but I can't be taught how to dance, okay? And that goes because it's out of my context. It does not really operate quite well with me. And what's the larger purpose? I mean, are you learning for today, or are you learning for tomorrow, or are you learning for what we call as making an impact, or what's called as that blue dot? With that, I'll pause. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shashwat. For felicitating him, I would like to call Ms. Padma Priya on board.